My fingers were frozen, not from the cold, but that twist of excitement and dread in my gut. It was the usual Wednesday night, kids at their grandparents', husband glued to a report at work. But lately, these quiet evenings filled me with a restless energy that had nothing to do with housework. "Wish you were here," he typed, the little dots flashing at the bottom of the screen. A month ago, I would have rolled my eyes, maybe sent a playful groan. But now, a jolt ran through me. He didn't know about the nights I'd spend up late with him instead of my husband. Didn't know about the selfies I deleted 5 times before sending. But those virtual sparks? They felt undeniably real. Still, my hand lingered over that delete button. I could make this stop right now. "You too," I typed back, voice cracking even with no one around to hear. It was the lie that sealed it. From then on, it was only a matter of time. Each text fueled that twist in my stomach. Excitement mixed with guilt that grew heavier each day, but never enough to actually stop. I told myself it was harmless. A little flirtation, a distraction from the same old routine. But he saw something in me my husband didn't anymore. Or maybe I was finally seeing a part of myself I'd kept hidden for too long. The woman who craved attention, the one who used to flirt effortlessly before the kids and the mortgage and the comfortable predictability. The night he suggested meeting, the guilt flared hot for a second. Then came the thrill, a reckless, dangerous feeling that was stronger. He was in a different city, but we'd both be visiting the same place soon, a business trip for him, a family reunion for me. Stupid, I knew, but stupid felt damn good after years of doing everything right. The hotel room was booked. No turning back. That's the thing about those paths. Sometimes the first step is a hesitant toe across the line. It feels easy to pull back. But then one step becomes 2, then a sprint, and you're so far down the path that turning back feels impossible. Driving to that hotel, every mile felt like a betrayal. Each mile also brought a surge of anticipation I hadn't felt in, well, forever. I tried to shove down the sick feeling, focusing instead on how I'd explain my outfit to my family. Rehearsed lies were becoming second nature now. In the tiny bathroom, I redid my makeup, fingers shaking a little. It wasn't nervousness, it was a thrill. I'd never been the type to get ready for someone other than my husband, and it felt both wrong and exhilarating. Like I was finally taking the reins after years of just going through the motions. His knock on the door made my heart pound so loud I was sure he'd hear it from the hallway. Then he was there, and any leftover guilt disappeared in a rush. He was exactly how I pictured him, but taller, his smile doing something twisty in my chest. That first night was a blur. Stolen kisses in dark corners, laughter tinged with danger, whispering promises that felt like binding contracts on my soul. The guilt, I knew, would hit me later, but in those hours, I drowned it in stolen moments. The whole weekend was like that. A bubble outside of reality. When I hugged my kids goodbye on Monday morning, it felt like I was 2 separate people. The mom, back in her routine, and the other woman who'd left pieces of herself scattered across a hotel room. "You seem distracted," my husband said that night. His eyes held a tired concern. I wanted to tell him everything. To beg forgiveness before I was in too deep. Instead, I smiled and blamed it on work stress. The lies started flowing easier. Each one felt like a nail hammered into my coffin. It wasn't just my husband I was betraying, but the version of myself I used to be. Yet, even while hating myself, I couldn't stop. He texted as soon as I got to work. The messages now a lifeline I craved. My job, always a source of pride, seemed dull in comparison. I'd snap at the kids for no reason, then feel that familiar guilt twist in my gut. But it went away the moment my phone buzzed with another message, another hit of attention that made me forget the emptiness. My phone lit up with his name and my stomach sank before the thrill even hit. It was getting harder to hide the way it made me light up, the way I'd race into the bathroom to text back the second I had a spare minute. One afternoon, my son asked why I was always on my phone. "Just checking work stuff," I lied, the guilt burning my cheeks. Now I was lying to my children. That's when I knew something had to change. "Maybe we could have a phone-free night?" I suggested to my husband over dinner. He seemed surprised but smiled. "Sure, good idea." An hour later, I was in the bathroom, phone shoved deep in my bathrobe pocket, trying to focus on bath time with the kids but itching with the need to check my messages. I felt like a junkie, the craving almost painful now. That night, under the covers, I told myself I'd end it. I'd tell him it was a mistake, delete everything, and try to stitch my life back together. Then my phone buzzed, his name lighting up the darkness. My willpower crumbled with a single message. The next few weeks were a blur of escalating lies and escalating excitement. Late nights supposedly at the office turned into more hotel rooms, more stolen moments. My family seemed to buzz around me like I was on a different frequency. I wasn't fully present for anyone, least of all myself. Then one morning, as I was deleting old texts, my heart stopped. A photo I sent him, nothing explicit, but enough to blow my life apart if it was found on the wrong phone. Panic flared, and I started frantically searching for ways to wipe the digital evidence. It was then that I realized how far down the rabbit hole I'd fallen. This wasn't just an affair anymore, it was all-consuming. He'd become an obsession, and every text, every meeting, was tightening the trap around me. I wasn't the good girl, breaking the mold anymore. I was the woman losing everything, and even then, I couldn't stop. My best friend cornered me during our weekly coffee date. "You seem off. Is everything all right?" Her eyes held that mix of concern and knowing that I both dreaded and desperately craved. "Just tired," I said, focusing intently on stirring my coffee. I could lie to my husband, my kids, even myself, but not her. "Something's going on," she pushed, gentle but insistent. The urge to confess swelled in my chest, but the fear choked it back down. I was drowning in secrets, but telling anyone the truth felt like stepping off a cliff. He seemed to sense my hesitation. His texts became more frequent, demanding, pushing boundaries that had felt thrilling at first but now just made me anxious. Guilt had morphed into a constant hum, a low-level dread that I couldn't escape. My husband's promotion party loomed. I usually loved planning these things, but now it just felt like one more lie to add to the pile. His family, our friends, toasting our happy marriage, a joke I wasn't laughing at anymore. Then he sent me a link, a hotel in his city, a date the week before the party. It wasn't a suggestion anymore, it was an expectation. The panic was back, hot and sharp this time. I knew I didn't have to go, but how could I refuse without blowing all of this wide open? The night of the party, I smiled and took photos, a perfect hostess on autopilot. But inside I was unraveling. I excused myself early, claiming a headache, and as soon as I was upstairs, I typed out a message. "I can't do this anymore." The lie, ironically, was also how I tried to begin telling the truth. I knew it was messy and cowardly, but it was something. I hit send, closed my eyes, and braced myself for whatever would come next. The silence after hitting send was deafening. I stared at the screen, waiting, dreading his response. Minutes ticked by, each one a slow drip of acid in my gut. What had I done? His answer came, a simple question mark, but the tone was unmistakable. He was angry, confused, hurt. The guilt hit me like a truck. I couldn't backpedal, invent excuses. But confessing everything felt impossible. Instead, I typed, "I'm not happy." Pathetic, I knew, but it was the most truth I could handle. The next few hours were a blur of texts, a storm of questions and accusations. He was devastated, scrambling to understand what he'd done wrong. My answers were vague, cowardly deflections. The truth was, I didn't even know what was wrong anymore, only that the escape had become a prison. My husband called on his way home from the party. His voice was tight, thick with barely controlled pain. I choked back tears, made some excuse about feeling sick. I couldn't tell him where I was, couldn't even tell myself. The night stretched out endlessly. Every buzz of my phone was a fresh wave of panic. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I scrolled through old photos of my family, the life I'd taken for granted, the life I was actively shattering. His next message, when it came, wasn't an accusation. It was heartbreak, raw and exposed. "I thought we were good. I thought we were enough." The truth of those words cut through my defenses. I had been happy, or at least content, until I wasn't. Until I chose excitement over stability, lust over love. But seeing his pain, so real and undeniable, made my own feel like a cheap imitation. The buzzing started again. He wasn't giving up, begging for some kind of explanation. I stared at the screen, fingers frozen. In that moment, I knew two things with absolute certainty. Hiding the truth was no longer an option, and my life was about to explode. My husband's car pulled into the driveway. The headlights swept across the windows, and I froze. There was nowhere to hide, no more lies to tell. My escape route had dead-ended in the most unavoidable place imaginable. When his key turned in the lock, I was on my feet. The carefully crafted image of the sick wife dissolved. Now there was just me, exposed and trembling. He walked in, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger anymore, but a kind of stunned despair that squeezed my chest. "Where were you?" His voice was barely a whisper. I couldn't form the words. They lodged in my throat like shards of glass. Instead I reached for my phone, pulled up the stream of texts, and handed it to him. Silence fell like a shroud. He read slowly, each message twisting the knife deeper in both our hearts. I wanted to look away, to shield him from the ugliness, but I owed him this. I owed him the brutal, unedited truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. How long? The answer, weeks turning into months, hung heavy in the air. The happy family photos on the wall seemed like a cruel joke now. Why? It was the only word he could manage, but the question held a universe of hurt. I didn't know. Not really. Excuses bubbled up, boredom, resentment, loneliness, but they all rang hollow against the look on his face. The truth was that I'd broken us not because of anything, but because of who I'd chosen to become. I don't know, I choked out, the tears flowing freely now. Shame burned hotter than any anger he could have shown me. It went on like that, questions and half-answers spiraling through the night. There was no excusing what I'd done, and I didn't try. The woman in those texts was a stranger, but she was still me. The consequences of my choices had come crashing down, and there was no escaping the wreckage. The sun rising felt like an accusation. We stayed up the whole night, locked in a painful cycle of questions and tearful apologies. Neither of us slept, but rest felt unattainable when our whole world was fracturing. My husband, the man I'd known for half my life, was suddenly a stranger. I saw him break in ways I never could have imagined. The stoic, dependable man was reduced to quiet sobs, his shoulders heaving with the weight of my betrayal. It was monstrous, what I'd done to him. In the harsh light of day, my phone seemed tainted. Each vibration, once a thrill, was now a fresh wave of nausea. He'd taken it from me in the night, scrolling endlessly, but he didn't say a word about what he'd found. It didn't matter. He already knew the worst part, me. The kids woke up, oblivious to the bomb that had detonated in their home. I made them breakfast with robotic movements, wanting to shield them from the ruin, yet knowing it was impossible. My parents called. Routine check-in turned crisis control. My mother's voice cracked when I told her I wasn't coming for Sunday dinner. No excuses could soften the blow of the truth. Her devastated silence mirrored my own guilt. The day stretched out endlessly. My husband asked me to leave, just for a while. "I need to think," he said, his voice empty. I packed a bag, shame fueling each frantic movement. There was no argument, no fight left in either of us. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back. It wasn't the home I'd built that felt foreign, it was the woman I saw reflected in the rearview mirror. Where did she come from, this careless, cruel version of myself? The thrill of the affair was ash in my mouth. All that remained was a gaping hole where my life used to be. My sister's apartment was small and cluttered, a stark contrast to the ordered life I'd left behind. She took one look at my swollen eyes and didn't ask questions. Just hugged me and made strong coffee. I couldn't tell her the whole truth. Not yet. But spilling the burden of the lies, even a piece of it, felt both terrifying and liberating. "Things aren't good with," I started, my voice cracking, "with your brother-in-law." Her eyes widened, concern warring with a justified spark of anger. After a long pause, she just nodded. Judgment could come later. Right now, I needed support, not another person to hate me for what I'd done. The hours blurred into a messy mix of tears and whispered half-truths. I told her about the creeping dissatisfaction, the boredom, the way I'd started to feel invisible. The affair itself remained unspoken, a monster too big to confront right then. The urge to check my phone was a physical ache. Each minute without a message felt both agonizing and hopeful. Was this how an addict felt during withdrawal? I tried to focus on my sister's face, tried to ground myself in something other than the toxic pull of secrecy. "You need to tell him," she finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "The whole truth. This isn't gonna fix itself." I knew she was right. But it felt like walking into a fire. The destruction was inevitable, a question of whether I'd get burned, or utterly consumed. My husband called that evening. I almost didn't answer, but I knew my sister was watching, strength gleaming in her eyes. I'm at my sister's, I told him. My voice shook, betraying me. We need to talk. His tone wasn't angry, just weary. The weight of everything unsaid hung heavy in the air. I know, I whispered. And in that tiny word, there was the sliver of a promise to stop running, to face the consequences head on, and maybe, just maybe, begin the impossible work of picking up the shattered pieces. Going back to my own house felt like walking into a crime scene. Every corner held a memory, happy ones now tainted with betrayal. I couldn't stay there, not while the wound was so raw. My sister insisted I stay with her. It was good not to be alone. My husband came to collect some things. We moved through the familiar rooms like ghosts, barely speaking. He was a shell of the man I'd married, his eyes hollowed out with pain. It should have brought satisfaction to see him hurt, but it only filled the empty spaces inside me with more guilt. My phone buzzed. My stomach twisted. I ignored it, but the texts kept coming, each one more desperate. I finally snapped. Please stop, I typed, the words feeling pathetically inadequate when balanced against everything I'd done. His reply was swift and cruel. He lashed out, accusing me of playing games, of tearing him apart. In the face of his anger, some small, stubborn part of me hardened. I'd hurt my husband more than he could ever understand, yet I wasn't going to let this man hurt me too. It's over, I messaged, then blocked his number. The relief was immediate and nauseating in equal measure. The next few days were a blur of tearful confessions to my sister, awkward silences with my parents, and long, sleepless nights filled with self-loathing. There was also an unexpected comfort in the finality of it. The messy affair was over, but its aftermath stretched out in front of me like a long, dark tunnel. My husband called every day. At first, I couldn't bring myself to answer, letting the calls go to voicemail. His messages were a mix of hurt, anger, and desperate attempts to understand. I ached for him, and at the same time, I couldn't face the pain I'd caused. But hiding wasn't the answer. I knew that. One shaky morning, I finally answered his call. His voice was rough, strained. We need to talk, he said again. And this time, I knew I was ready. Or at least, as ready as I'd ever